for putting that on there.
Sure.
I watched them. Yeah, I was able to watch those earlier this week. Yeah.
Great. And we are recording tonight's session as well. And let's go ahead and get started. So thank you all for joining us. We're going to have people popping in as we continue, but this is our second listening and learning virtual session. And the first one was last week, and that was about circulation. And tonight we'll be talking about economic vitality. Why is it not moving? Hold on, trying to get my screen to, there we go. So my name is Andy Rogers, and I'm here as part of a team with my colleague, Carrie Eberly, and we're from a company called Southwest Decision Resources. We're based out of Flagstaff, and our role is to really ensure broad community engagement. And we're doing that through these community forums. We had a big community forum in September. We have the pleasure of working with a citizen work group that meets once a month. We have Ernie Strouch and Rick Henderson at least with us, and Mary Garland just joined us, and hopefully more work group members will join. And this is again our second listening and learning session, and we have many more things planned, including in-person topical workshops in the spring. So TBD for when those will be, but again, those will be in person. We want to make sure that we use a multitude of different ways for people to engage, recognizing not everybody has the same schedule. So before we get going, you've probably used Zoom, but we're going to run through some quick Zoom tips because we'll be using some different features this evening. So you can rename yourself by clicking on 3 dots in your picture, if you'd like to do that, so we know who's here. We'd ask that you stay on mute unless you're speaking, just to minimize background noise. That's where the mute button is. We'd love it if you could turn your video on so it feels just a little closer to home and we can get to know you a little bit. You can view the participants by clicking that button. You can chat, and we really encourage you to practice that now. We will be utilizing the chat box quite a bit this evening. So when you chat, it will be recorded, and when you chat, everyone can see your chats. Just know that. You can also change your view. We will be sharing screen quite a bit tonight, so this is a little bit limited while we're sharing screen, but just a learning tip for you in the future. And then we'd ask that you use, just like in a meeting, use respectful behavior, try to stay engaged, and do use that chat box. Raising your hand, there's a variety of different emotions that you can use. We will be using your raising your hand button. I have to move your faces around. Let's see. Okay, so we're going to practice.
Yeah.
Carrie has a little poll for you this evening.
Good evening. My name is Carrie Everly. I am working with Andy on this project with the city of Sedona. Another key feature that the Zoom has is it allows us to get to know who's here tonight or ask specific questions. So to do that, I'm going to launch a poll, and you guys are going to go ahead and indicate which item, and please be aware that there are many items, so you're going to need to be able to scroll up and down. And we're asking you to select, and it's a single choice only, which of the descriptions best describes your current employment status, because we're talking about economics. So it's kind of cool for us to get to know who's in the room and kind of gauge kind of the state of the 30 people on Zoom tonight.
Is it launched?
It's launched.
I don't get to take it as the host.
You don't.
I know. So go ahead and fill that out, and Carrie will share the results when you're done.
Great.
If you're having trouble, having technical trouble, just go ahead and put that in the chat box, and we will get to you as we can.
All right. We're going to leave this poll open for a full minute. So we have 20 seconds left. It looks like 23 out of the 28 people who can take the poll have taken it. So I'm going to give a little time for those other 5 to go ahead and put their.
I wish they would tell us who hasn't done it.
I know.
Because then we could just call them up.
All right. Still hovering at 23. All right.
Good
Well,
enough.
That's good enough. I'm going to go ahead and end the poll. And the cool thing about Zoom is that I can share the results with you all. So here are the results from that quick poll. So it looks like we're divided between, a third fully retired, a third full-time employee, employed in person, some partially retired, some full-time virtual. So again, just a cool way to let us know who's here tonight.
Thanks, Carrie. So next, Cynthia Lovely will be talking about why we're here. And I should have mentioned that. This effort this evening is one more engagement method to have some discussions about the update for the Sedona's community plan. So Cynthia will be talking about that, but the bulk of the evening will be a conversation. So we invite you to sit back, let's get philosophical, let's have some fun, let's tackle some hard issues about the Sedona area, and we'll be led through that process by Molly Spangler with the City of Sedona, Tom Binnings, an economist, and Vivi Rio, Steve Ayers with the town of Camp Verde. And throughout this whole discussion tonight, we'll be continuing to use this interactive feedback. So we have a series of questions, and then we'll do an interactive exercise, sometimes talking, sometimes doing something like a poll, and then we'll wrap up. So thank you. We want to hear from you. We want your questions. We want your comments. There is a comment card on the Plan Sedona as well. So if you don't get your questions answered tonight, please put those there. And please listen for understanding, be thoughtful about your questions, respect everyone here this evening, and provide that space and time for clarification. Okay, Cynthia Lovely.
Okay. I unmuted myself this time.
Good job, Cynthia.
So this is going to be super brief. If you want more details, plansedona.com tells you all about the Sedona Community Plan. It is a general plan. That's what the state calls it. And the state requires that of municipalities. They also require that we have a 10-year update of the plan. And that's what we are doing now. We are updating the plan that was written, well, it was approved in 2013. And basically the community plan is a guide. It gives direction, especially with development as well as city projects. It covers all sorts of topics, including the economy, circulation or transportation, land use, etc. Next slide. Okay, so hopefully everybody knows. If not, the city incorporated in 1988. So the first community plan was in 1991, and there have been multiple plans since then. I didn't list them all, but right now our current plan covers a span of 2013 to 2023. So we're doing the update now. We hope to be completed at the end of 23. And so the next plan that will come out of this whole planning process, that one will span 2023 to 2033. So as we are talking today and in future workshops, etc., we are trying to look out 10 years from now, as well as looking back 10 years. So a lot has happened in the last 10 years, and we can only speculate what may happen in the next 10 years. And so that's where we are at right now. Hopefully we will have a completed, updated plan by the end of 2023. That's it.
Great. Okay, so for the next little bit, we've got 4 questions, and this is going to be kind of a panel discussion with Tom, Molly, and Steve having some discussion surrounding 4 questions. And again, after each question, we're going to invite you to participate. So Tom's going to start first. And the question is, what is economic vitality, and is it different from economic development? So I'm going to leave that up. Tom's going to start, and we're all going to have a conversation.
Okay, great. Thank you. So I'm Tom Binnings, and I'm the next year's chair for Verde Valley Regional Economic Organization, and also have my own private economic consulting firm. But the notion of economic vitality versus development, it's really kind of a nuanced difference on the one hand, and the economic vitality kind of came into the lexicon of developers, economic developers, about in the 1990s, as best I can tell or remember. And so it really is more about, as opposed to, when you think of vitality, the capacity to live, grow, or develop, sort of adapt well, versus development is to make active or promote the growth of something. And so vitality, economic vitality, is really more about kind of creating the economic ecosystem within a community that everything works around. So looking at this chart, this is sort of one of my go-tos. And this is essentially the graphic is about how every economy works, especially at the local or regional level. And so you have primary dollars that have to flow into the economy through exports, or people coming to the economy and bringing money, or through transfer payments or retirement incomes. But those primary dollars come from the rest of the world, and they come into the local economy where they get multiplied and become what we call secondary dollars, or the secondary economy. And that's all the local things that go on. And then ultimately the dollars leak out to back to the rest of the world. So it's very open and dynamic in that regard. And I think from this perspective, well, first of all, when we think of this Sedona, even though I don't have hard numbers to all this, my speculation is that tourism is the largest primary source of dollars. And we get retirement incomes with permanent retirees. And then we have location neutral jobs and micro businesses that have customer bases out in the rest of the world, or working out in the world virtually. And so those are, I think, the largest sources of primary dollars. But if any one of those were to change, having economic vitality is paying attention to those sources and looking at where we need to adapt, or to maybe diversify, or have something else come into play. But most importantly, I think, is in that middle area where we see the multiplier, and that's where these dollars circulate in the local economy. There we're looking at things like housing, healthcare, education, transportation, workforce development, things of that nature. So that's about kind of creating that ecosystem that is both going to naturally kind of induce, if you will, groups to be very dynamic in attracting primary dollars, but also to look at how to make the best and enhance the well-being of the local economy the most. Does that answer the question? So we're about vitality is really about kind of creating the ecosystem for the local economy, as I see it.
Great. And would Molly or Steve like to contribute to that question?
Yeah, I think also, when we're looking at economic vitality, and just for those who have joined, my name's Molly Spengler. I'm the Director of Economic Development here at the City of Sedona. When we're looking at economic vitality, part of it is trying to address some of our key challenges, and challenges that, I don't think a lot of these, the challenges are going to be a surprise to many people, but, we're looking at, we're an economy reliant on tourism. So we lack diversity, and, we have a workforce challenge in town, and a lot of that's attributable to workforce housing. We have an aging population that can also attribute to, why we have some workforce issues. We have, lack of higher wage jobs, inadequate broadband, limited access to quality healthcare, and lack of, kind of development ready type of land. And so, how do we answer those questions, through this vitality process? It's not just about more at the cost of doing more, like traditional economic development.
Great. Steve, would you like to add?
Yeah, I'll first off agree with both of the other two of my co-speakers here. I view economic vitality as what happens when you do economic development right. It's one that pays attention to the challenges out there and addresses it from the way the community looks at it. In other words, I use the term investing on two sides of the ledger here in Camp Verde, where while you're doing the traditional economic development, providing the infrastructure you need to create wealth, at the same time, you need to be investing that wealth in some of the things that are important to your community. And sometimes that's protecting things, and sometimes it's conserving things. Sometimes it's just preserving the culture and the history of it. Sometimes it's the what do I want to say, the general surrounding area, which is, I know, a key point for the folks in Sedona. So economic vitality is a case where you get it right. You actually take some of that, what you're making, you're investing back into trying to make a balanced ecosystem, as Tom calls it.
I
Great.
want to add, is that
Go ahead,
if
Molly.
the mine, Andy? I want to add one more
Yeah,
thing to what Steve was just saying. I think it's also, when we're talking about economic vitality, it's also about our values and making sure that we're honoring those values that are true to our residents and Sedona. And so making sure that we're capturing that and letting that kind of guide that, that vitality, because we get to define it, and that's what this whole 10-year plan is about.
great.
Yeah, and one of my, I think the city of Boulder describes their vitality program as encourages innovation, entrepreneurship, and economic opportunity while preserving community character and quality of life. So I think that's a key element that Steve and Molly are talking about.
Great. And we're doing great on time for the first question. If there's any questions from the participants this evening about this questions about the question, we're happy to take a couple questions right now, and then we're going to launch into the little interactive portion of this part. Are there any questions for our panelists at this point? Okay, we're just getting more background
I
here.
think
I have
Ernie
one.
has one. There
Oh,
we
great,
go.
Ernie. Sorry, it's
Nope.
hard to track. Go for it, Ernie.
Okay, Steve Ayers and I were formerly with the SETI Economic Development Initiative and FLAG, and we focused quite a bit, and I'd like to focus here on the issue of, when we talk about anything economic, the issue of more of something, always increasing, always growing, versus I focus on better, or if you put a slash mark there, better or higher quality. In other words, whether that's talking about quality of life, but I think we have a finite planet, we have finite resources here, and I think one of our major focuses should always be about increasing the quality of what we do rather than the quantity of what we do.
Yep.
Any panelists care to comment on Ernie's
And-
comment?
That's very consistent with the notion of economic vitality as
Yeah.
opposed to economic development.
Right, I agree.
Ernie, you
Chris?
nailed it. I would not have expected anything less.
Chris, let's go ahead with Chris's question, and then we'll move to the word cloud exercise. Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, so I'm
Christopher.
Chris. Hopefully my statements or my questions aren't too elementary sounding. Never participated in one of these before. I don't have a PhD in economics. I got a C in my business class in undergrad. So,
We're glad you're here.
I have a degree in professional writing, Christopher. Don't feel bad.
If it wasn't for autocorrect, I don't know where I would be. So I'm happy to hear this. So one of the things I hear is when I hear someone bring up quality of life and quality of economics, and then I think of how do you tie that to economic vitality? And what was explained to me earlier, or what I heard is basically one of the goals is to create additional diversities in economic vitality through various ways of doing that, while being aware and conscious of very real hiccups that are here in Sedona, Arizona. So when I hear quality, what I interpret that as is basically trying to make the economic system more efficient. So that way it's not just, as well as me mentioned earlier, grow, grow, grow. The reality is we do need to grow in certain areas. And if we're not growing, and this is like a lot of like statistics, and I'm not just picking like one or two things I'm thinking, but if you're not growing, you're becoming stagnant. And what I've seen in cities is when they go stagnant, especially in rural communities, the population goes down. And when the population goes down, other factors do go down also. And that is one thing I'm, concerned about. There's, as that poll was mentioned earlier, 30% of people here in this room are retired, semi-retired, or full-time working here. And then 10%, 5% here in this. So that is something to be concerned about in terms of the quality of economic vitality here. But I do feel that, with an expert panel looking at this, full-time people trying to listen to the citizens here, I feel that I do have faith in, whatever happens, but I do have faith that the best interests will prevail in everything. Those are my 2 cents.
Thank you,
Right.
Chris. Appreciate that. After such a positive statement, we're now going to move back to the challenges. So thank you so much. I'm going to stop sharing so that Carrie can launch this next exercise.
Right. So as I kind of like to, Chris, you mentioned that there are hiccups. Molly talked about the challenges that face, Sedona regarding economics. And so I'm putting in the chat right now a link. I would like everyone to click on the link. Yep. So if you click on that link, it takes you to a Mentimeter that says, what is the biggest challenge facing Sedona's economy? And you have a limited amount of characters. We're asking you to have one, from my perspective, this is the biggest challenge. So if people want to start, writing those in, that would be great. And then I will share my screen and we can see what people are saying.
What's gonna,
Hold on, Ernie. We're just navigating the Zoom issues. You guys seeing the Mentimeter question? Just
Yep, you
type
guys
in your
are typing
answer.
those in. All right.
And this will populate as people continue to add. And the bigger the word, the more people are saying that.
Yep. So once you guys are done, you guys can come back to Zoom and see what I'm sharing here.
Oh, I love it.
Yeah.
Young energy.
I can also kind of track. So it looks like 15 people have indicated what they think the biggest challenge is for Sedona's economy. I'm sure it's not too surprising to you all to see that the biggest words there are affordable housing. We will be talking about that at an additional in-person workshop as well in the spring, kind of focusing a little more on that.
Very telling.
Yep.
Not quite done. How many people?
I've got
have-
17 people, so I'm going to give it like 10 more seconds.
And there are some questions coming into the chat box. We will do our best to get to those, but if we're in the middle of an exercise and the panelists can address any of those, that would be great. We see those coming in and they will all be saved. If we don't get to them this evening, we will get to them.
Okay, so you guys can see hopefully on my screen what that word cloud is kind of representing so far. Feel free to keep adding those in, and I'm going to stop sharing and we'll make sure to include those as well on the website.
Great, thank you. All right, back to the show. Here we go.
Show.
The show. I hope someone has popcorn. All right, back to the second question, and Molly will start this one. So we've gone through all the challenges. How are we addressing economic vitality locally? Molly's going to start.
When I think of economic vitality, I really do think of economic sustainability. What do we need to do to sustain and increase the quality of life for our residents, over the next 10 years, but not even just 10, 20, 30, 50 years. What does that look like? And I think that the way to do that, one of the ways is to look at economic vitality. I mean, that's one of the main reasons why we're investing in that as the city is for that, that long-term economy for our residents and making sure that we have that quality of life. To me, it is about making sure that we have the right ingredients in place. Do we have do we have a plan in place? Are we following that plan? Do we have the right public policy and regulations in place? Infrastructure, roads, water, sewer, broadband is another key infrastructure item, workforce. Quality of life issues around housing affordability, education, recreation, access to quality healthcare. Those are the types of ingredients that we need. Sedona isn't economic development strategy isn't to go recruit a Toyota manufacturing plant or to do chip manufacturers. We really are trying to find that right balance, and so we can have a longer sustainable economy. It's kind of like, when you think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, we need to have those base things in place and those right ingredients in place, like public policy, like a plan, like the right infrastructure, so we can have those opportunities to diversify our industries and to continue to maintain and have a workforce. The way that we're doing it right now is we're looking at how we can tackle some of those key challenges that we're mentioning within our given capacity here at the city and within the capacity of working with our partners. We have prioritized broadband, and we're working on the strategy of trying to expand quality broadband access for our residents. Healthcare, we just, we are wrapping up a citizen healthcare advisory group to better understand what needs may be needed in Sedona to address healthcare, not just as a quality of life issue, but as an economic development strategy for business development there as well. Always trying to focus on business assistance and making sure that our local businesses have access to the right resources that our key partners are already bringing to the table, whether it's loans or data or business planning resources, making sure that they understand that. And then, supporting those other initiatives that are going on around the city, whether it's, some of the work that's going on with transit or affordable housing or our sustainability efforts. Those all matter when it comes to our long-term economic vitality. And so those are some of the strategies and the ways that we're working on addressing it. And I'll, kind of kick it over to my other friends here to talk more about the region and and kind of more globally.
Steve,
Yeah, I'll go ahead and jump in here. I think one of the key factors, the key tools to address economic vitality is having strategic plans like you're doing here today. I think they've proven themselves, at least in my community, to be extremely valuable to us. For instance, we did a river recreation master planning process back in 2016. We did an outdoor recreation master planning one with urban upland trail plan back in 2019. These are before we were building trails, before we were building parks. We outlined them, we identified them, we saw where they were bumping up against communities and neighborhoods. We brought the neighborhoods into the conversations. And I think in many ways we were proactive enough to avoid the clashes that often occur when you don't take the proactive approach by going out and being strategic about it from the very beginning. So I can't emphasize that enough. And that goes for whatever challenge you may have in your community.
Yeah, I totally agree that having sort of the vision and the plan and then monitoring on a regular basis progress with that plan is important. But going back to the notion of an economic ecosystem, I would add to this the notion of what are the constraints that we find in our community that hinder our ability to be open to, let's say, some communities, I'll use Fort Collins as an example, which is considered very progressive, but as they were embarking upon a Baldrige Award, which is unusual for a city, they found that one of their biggest challenges is that they don't listen to the business community. And so they have these obstacles that are not intentional. It's just some constraints that get in the way of, let's say, an affordable housing concept, for instance. And I would also say that the challenges that we face here are not unique in time or place. One of the first projects I ever worked on was affordable housing for Aspen, Colorado, back 40 years ago. And so these things have been around. These issues are fairly persistent. Rural healthcare is an issue everywhere, not having sufficient population, but there are also, opportunities. What I'm most excited about, where I think economic vitality can come into play, in creating basic infrastructure around broadband, so that some of our limitations that we've had in the past geographically, like in healthcare, can be undone or mitigated through things like telehealth, or education. Same thing with education.
Steve or Molly, care to continue, or questions from the audience? We've got some nice conversation going in the chat box. Any questions about this question? I got to find a way to rephrase that.
I'm curious about the comment about, I think Judith commented about connecting community areas versus competing interests. If I'm just curious if there's a little more context to that, so we could potentially address that question.
Sure. Judith, are you comfortable clarifying your chat in there? Where is Judith? There, she's coming off. Go ahead, Judith.
Yes, I'm probably one of the few people probably in this chat room who actually lives in Uptown. So, what I hear all the time, and it's meant in a, in a friendly way, but, oh, I wouldn't go to Uptown, I would never go there. Oh, the Village, I would never go over there. Oh, West Sedona, oh, the traffic is terrible on Cooks Hill. And I'm just laughing because I grew up in New York City, and I grew up in Queens, and people didn't like to cross boroughs and all that, but the idea is that it just makes me laugh about it, because we're such a small community, less than 10,000 people, and it just seems to me that if we could connect ourselves to the different little community areas, we would be so much stronger and we would have so much better ideas. But when I listen to people, and honestly, I listen a lot, since I live in Uptown, I hear it all. And everybody just has their own interests, it seems, about their little areas. And when I look at the areas, I think to myself, they're so small that they're insignificant, really. But if we could bound together, and if we could connect ourselves, even for the tourists to be able to connect to different areas, or even connect to Verde Valley. I love Verde Valley. I love Camp Verde. I love Cottonwood. I love all these little areas. They all have their unique culture. And when I have visitors, I take them to these different areas because I find significant things in all of them. But I never hear anyone talking about that. It's always housing, traffic, workers. And I want to hear say about the merchants, the entrepreneurs in our city who we hardly ever really speak to them. And I hear so many people that don't support our merchants in Sedona, and I do. And I'm just saying that, to me, I really feel sad about that. And I hope that we address that, or at least look at that in the plan. I think it's a very important element to the vitality of our community. If we're not connected, it doesn't matter what we do.
Thanks, Judith.
I have a few comments to that, if you don't mind, Andy, or I was
Sure.
going to say,
Yeah, we're good.
to start off with, one of the things that we have incorporated in our existing economic diversification plan that was put together in 2020. One of the values, or a couple different values that we put in there as our guiding principles, frankly, were creative placemaking. So when there are new developments or redevelopments, is there, we want to look at those opportunities to make sure that we're creating that sense of place, and that there is kind of a place to gather, and it's more than just that, kind of boring space. So that's something, we may want to look at moving forward, continuing to do that. Another one of our guiding principles is working to focus on our local businesses, and make sure that they are going to be sustainable in the long run. They're already here, and trying to find out what it takes for them to expand or to add another staff member or grow, or what types of barriers they're experiencing. And then, kind of shifting gears to talk more regionally, some of the reasons why I'm here tonight with Steve Ayers, he's my counterpart in Camp Verde, and then Tom Bennings, is an economist who will be the chair of VV Rio, which is the Verde Valley Regional Economic Organization. It's a regional economic organization that all the communities belong to, and we're working on some of these larger strategies. So we are working together, and I've had the privilege of working in both Illinois and economic development over the past 20 years, and I got to say, this group, the fact that we keep meeting and working together, I think is pretty compelling, and it's been pretty impressive that this group continues to get together. So I want to make sure people on the call are aware of that group, and that is one of our focuses.
Thanks, Molly. Probably time for one more comment or so before we do a little exercise. Tom or Steve want to round us out, or we can move on to that exercise?
I'll throw one in really quickly. I'm going to echo what Molly said. It's an absolute joy doing economic development here in the Verde Valley, Sedona area. Because of the working relationship, we are not siloed in how we view this. And it's amazing how, if you put the community plans of Clarkdale, Camp Verde, Cottonwood, and Sedona next to each other, each has a little different taste and a little flavor to it, but essentially the values that pervade in Camp Verde are the same values that pervade in Sedona, and the same in Cottonwood and Clarkdale. So we all, I think, take a very holistic view of the Verde Valley, and the economy of Sedona is not isolated from the economy of Camp Verde. And we understand that, and we get it. Good jobs, housing in one community benefit the community next door.
Great. Thank you, Steve. Okay, I'm going to cue my colleague for the chat waterfall exercise. It's really exciting. You guys ready?
Super exciting. As soon as I explain this and everybody gets to it, I see your hand up, Dave, and we'll get to you. So
That's all right.
Okay. This is called the chat waterfall, and the reason it's a waterfall is because everyone has to wait. So I'm going to post a question in the chat, and everybody's going to write their answer. And you guys are already talking about this, like additional strategies that can improve Sedona's economy into the future. So you guys are already touching on a lot of these things, but I'm going to put it in the chat. Everyone's going to write their answer, but don't click enter until we say to click enter. So go ahead and take a minute to think about additional strategies, write those down, but don't hit return or enter just yet.
And don't worry if you do, invariably someone does, and you're still invited to stay on the call. So answer that question in the chat, but do not hit return. It's like mind control over your muscles. Good luck. Molly, you better answer that question. She's over there just typing away.
No, I wanted to before it was a waterfall. I know, I hit center.
Good job. Additional strategies are two things. And how about we use our Zoom skills? When you're done, just raise your hand. That way we'll have a good idea of when you're finished.
Yeah, go ahead and hit your reaction button to raise your hand when you're done. Their hands, that's great. I'm gonna give you guys 1 full minute and then we'll do it.
And we will be able to provide all of the chat content in the notes as well from this session. So great conversation in there.
Okay.
It's the anticipation.
I know. So again, if you're halfway through or you hadn't started yet, we are asking what are additional strategies or 2 things that can improve Sedona's economy into the future. Don't hit return. All right, 10 seconds. We need some Jeopardy music. All right, if you have something written, go ahead and hit return now and the chat will populate with all of these cool strategies.
And you can
Nice.
scroll back and read them all.
So the cool thing about this is that there's a question at the top and then you guys can scroll through and see what are these additional things that your friends and neighbors and fellow community members think are strategies. So thank you all for participating. We will make sure and collect all of these thoughts and we will be putting them in the notes. And in the meantime, we'll move on to the next panelist question. Thank you all.
But I'm reading them.
Are you reading them?
All right.
Moment.
All right. I'll move on. Let me get that out of there. Okay, question number 3 of 4. Let me move your faces here. What economic shifts have occurred recently and how has that impacted surrounding communities? And so Steve's going to start this one, but be thinking this exercise for those of you that have joined, we're just going to have open dialogue about this. So there's going to be some challenging topics that come up. And so Steve's going to start again, what economic shifts have occurred recently and how has that impacted surrounding communities? Go ahead, Steve.
Sure, thanks. Probably the best way to answer this question is to just use an example of my own community. Camp Verde has for over a century been a farming community, and for probably at least the last 70 years of its existence, it's been a bedroom community. But that began to shift in 2018. Camp Verde got a designation to a federal opportunity zone, and the investors found and discovered a corridor in there that had been previously untapped. We are now seeing manufacturing jobs coming to Camp Verde. The recent announcement of a new 110,000 square foot building over there with 180 jobs in it. It'll be paying very good wages. Those shifts can begin to affect what goes on in Cottonwood as people get trained up for higher paying jobs. They would leave some of the service jobs that are related to the tourism business, and those can have a huge effect on the economy in Sedona. I think that we all have to be cognizant of the shifts that are taking place out there in the marketplace. And in Arizona, we see that huge chip manufacturer south of us down here. That is going to, trust me, that will bleed over. You can drive quicker from Camp Verde to the chip manufacturing plant than you can from Chandler or the east side of Phoenix in the morning to get there. So we're going to see some quantum shifts take place over the next 10, 20 years that some of us probably can't even imagine at this point. But we need to be, again, kind of like that strategic planning, we need to be looking ahead of this. We need to understand what can possibly impact us here and start to address those.
Great.
Go for it, Molly.
Oh, sure. Yeah, I was going to say, some of the things that I worry about when I look at Sedona's local economy is our workforce. And I know we keep talking about, the word workforce keeps coming up, but when people can go and get those jobs in Camp Verde, for example, and we, as whether it's residents or tourists or anybody, they're experiencing, we see restaurants closing, we see retail shops closing early, people don't have the staff. We're going to see even more of that if they're leaving for the jobs, in Camp Verde. So I think that, as we look 10 years and 20 years to the future, we need to be mindful of that in our community plan, and what things that we can do to make sure that we're hitting that off, and making sure that we can sustain that quality of life here, and have access to those things, as well as look at other solutions for diversifying. Because I think, in that regional labor scape, it's just as easy for somebody coming from Cottonwood to go to Camp Verde now instead of into Sedona.
Right. Tom?
Yeah, well, I think Steve's point was really well made about, we're becoming an exurb, if so to speak, to the Phoenix area, whereas before we were a tourist destination and an ag community, and maybe several small towns. And, now a wine industry has developed in the area. We're seeing manufacturing in Camp Verde, and there are also already workforce challenges facing merchants and the tourism industry in Sedona. And that's only going to sort of, be exacerbated in that sense. And so, and then if you're trying to attract more workforce, where do they go? Where do they live? And but I think a couple of the major shifts that we've seen recently with number one is the pandemic, and how quickly that has moved us ahead to having meetings like this, right, on Zoom, and putting the workplace in a virtual realm. And so that opens the door. I've run into a number of people locally now who are, moving from San Francisco or places where, and as long as they have reasonable broadband, they can work anywhere in the world. I teach in China sometimes, and through broadband. And so we're becoming much more integrated in that regard. The second major shift that's underway, and we're already seeing, manifestations of it go around climate change. And so this whole notion of how's the Verde Valley, or in this case, Sedona specifically, going to adapt what it does and how it does it, and in tourism that it tries to manage in terms of managing the tourism sector. How are we going to adapt to climate change? And what are the forecasts? What are the best forecasts for what we can expect in moving forward in terms of our microclimate here? And so I think those are critical. Becoming an exurb to Phoenix is a key element of shift. And then you have the demographic shift going on of boomers. I call the next 10 years the last hurrah of the boomer generation. And after that, we're pretty much out of here. We're going quickly. And so there will be the implication for that, for instance, is a massive transfer of housing that will happen starting, later this decade and into the following decade. And so, and we're all thinking we can survive off of retirement incomes. Well, maybe not. And so maybe more older people are looking to get back into the workforce, but don't ask me to work 40 hours a week, right? If I can't work 12 hours or 16 hours, I'm not interested. So I think there are a lot of things that are very dynamic and shifting on us.
Thanks for that, Tom. Molly, did you want to add?
Yeah, this is an unpopular comment, or a topic, but we do kind of need to talk a little bit about trade-offs, and how do we get to the right place. We don't have the luxury of having a blank slate. And, all of the simple solutions were already taken, the simple solutions have already been in place, and we have the luxury, or the misfortune or whatever, we're like dealing with really complex issues. And so, we talk about workforce housing, and we know that workforce is an issue and housing is their biggest impediment. Yet we have resistance, locally about some workforce housing issues. So where is, I guess, the question is I guess to challenge everybody on the call is where is it right? What are we willing to, how are we willing to balance that? Another comment was put in, the chat box about wages. I've got some recent data that we've been looking at internally that shows that our wages with our cost of living for the same jobs that could be done in the Phoenix metro area, we're underpaying. So, it's a really tough position for a city employee to go to a business and say, pay more. That's not really a popular choice. But what is that right trade-off? Is it a higher wage? Is it, offering those other benefits? But how do we balance it? Because we are going to have to give up something, or not give it, but trade in something for the right solution. So I really feel like those are the kind of answers that we really are seeking some of that guidance on, for moving forward over the next 10 years. It's tough. It's a hard question to answer.
Have we lost our moderator?
Okay, good. I'm glad. I thought maybe it was my computer. It looks like we might have lost it.
Well, maybe. So are there other challenges that you guys see? I mean, what are the major shifts that worry you the most as you look out there as a resident of Sedona?
I think about, just as somebody who's a mother personally, when I put on my personal hat, I do always worry about education and making sure that we have the right, education staff and enrollment in place, that those livability components, just to kind of get some of those things started here.
It looks like Mark has a question. So since our moderators are gone, let's just go to Mark and see what he has to say.
Sure. Yeah, I think that some of the challenges we face in Sedona are very unique because we have a very limited footprint in terms of the community. There's not a lot of developable property here. Prices are extremely high. And I think one of the things I've seen is that historically, Sedona has had a really strong local ownership to businesses. And I think that's a good thing. But what we're seeing over time is a shift where there's more out-of-state, out-of-country ownership in businesses in town. And in particular, short-term rentals are being snapped up by out-of-state and out-of-country people. So that has created I think a very dynamic shift. And I think local owners are more able to think about what's the best way to do business in town, whereas people that don't live in the town are more focused on the profit and extracting whatever they can out of this community. So that's a problem. I think one other issue that I think the community plan really needs to focus on is, what is our direction? Do we want to continue to grow? Do we want to do some things that control the type of growth or businesses that we have in town? Or do we really want to make it community focused? And that's kind of what I wanted to say.
Thank you. And Judith, thank you for that idea about a session like this for Sedona merchants. That's a great idea as we move forward. And sorry, everyone, we have very high internet at our hotel where we are, and it just decided to dump us, but we're back. We're nimble. So thank you for that idea. And thank you, Tom, for picking up, and everyone. So continuing on, we just really want to have this conversation about these hard conversation about shifts. And does anyone else have their hand up right now, or do any of the panelists want to chime in where we are right now? Again, the chat box is full of great ideas and conversations. Something about Flagstaff, that's where we are.
One of the things that intrigues me is we're certainly have moved towards a more global world, global economy, and we're talking about foreign owners coming in and buying up. And what's always intrigued me in the world of community economics is at what point, if we relied on the workplace historically, or churches or pubs, maybe, that was the one community element, but we relied on these external locations to go and engage and really to form community, a sense of community. And is that possible in the future as the world becomes more connected to broadband? Is it possible to have, this goes back a couple decades of sort of the high tech, high touch world, and how do we get that high touch element back to where we feel close to our neighbors, and I feel comfortable. Well, if I find a place to park, which increasingly is easy, or ride my electric bike into uptown Sedona, those are really cool things. And how do we create more of that?
Well, I'm happy to have someone comment on Tom's comment there, and it also segues us beautifully to our last question for the evening. And I have to, Rob, when you asked me, why do I have to move my cursor all over? It's because there's little windows that are all over the screen. I have to move the chat, then I have to move the screen share thing. So the last question is, what do you see as the future of the Verde Valley economy in the next 10, 20, and 30 years? And what is Sedona's role in that future? So like the last questions, we'll allow the panelists, or invite the panelists, I should say, to talk about this. And then we do want to just leave you with this question that you can answer tonight, but we certainly want you to embody this question beyond tonight. What is your role? What is your responsibility as a member of the Sedona community in terms of helping shape the future of Sedona as it relates to the economic vitality? So I don't know, this is a free-for-all. You panelists decide who gets to go first. What do you see as that future? We can go local to global or global to local, and I'll be quiet and let you think about it.
Well, I just want to comment quickly on, I think Sarah posted, first we have to define what is growth. And, and I think that's a good point. And a couple of things. First of all, growth doesn't necessarily mean, it doesn't have to mean, and I don't see how it really can mean to a substantial degree, population growth or more people or even more jobs in the Sedona area. It's more the composition. And I've seen communities define growth as, their goal is to have income growth exceed population growth, which means everybody's getting more income. So, so that's just one way. It's really, I think, for the community to define that. I often think of growth, of sort of human growth, think of it on an individual level. What does it mean to grow as a person? And the reality is that we're constantly kind of going through iterations of who we are, but that's the growth process. And so it's moving on this sort of path towards a vision, but reinventing who we are, how we get there. And so I think that to me, growth can be redevelopment, revitalization, rebirth, lots of those things. It can, growth is not just about population and job growth.
Thank you. And Rob, we see your hand is up. Go ahead.
You're on mute, Rob.
Thank you. When I look at the economy in the Verde Valley, I look at the major revenue generators or the major economic engines that are here. And as I see it, one of them is VVMC, the other one is Yavapai College. And I have real concerns about both of those entities in the future in the Verde Valley, because Yavapai College is dominated by a board that lives elsewhere, that doesn't necessarily have our best interest in mind. And, there's real concern about what's going on with BVMC with their idea of possibly moving their campus or most of their focus up to Flagstaff. So when you're looking at the possibility of the major economic engines moving away from the Verde Valley, I think that our immediate attention needs to be on those two things. How do we bring them back into the fold? How do we have a greater voice? So I haven't heard any conversation about that, and I don't know if it's a problem or a concern for the rest of the panelists.
Rob, those are all issues I think that are front and center to anybody who's doing economic development work here in the Verde Valley. I just have my own personal theory is that the economy creates vacuums, and those vacuums, you know, nature abhors a vacuum, and they get filled over time. I can already tell you right now that there are at least 2 other healthcare providers that are inching their way towards and into the Verde Valley. And we will see that in the future. It will not be dominated by Northern Arizona Healthcare, and they will either address the issues themselves, or they will find they have real competition in the marketplace for that. It's kind of my thoughts that there's just a natural evolving process that takes that. Now, education is a little bit more difficult, but I wouldn't be a bit surprised if Yavapai College isn't willing to step up and do what is necessary to provide an educated workforce for what's going to happen here. We'll find somebody else that will. We'll find another partner, whether it's Northern Arizona Northern Arizona University or some other likely partner. It's not far-fetched to have a 4-year university pilot a campus in this area.
So is there a group that's actively working on that? I mean, in both of those arenas, is there a group that's working on that?
I don't know about a group. I can tell you that I have a developer who's in talks with 2 of those healthcare providers about giving them a foothold in Camp Verde.
Mhm.
Education-wise, I know that we're all frustrated with Yavapai College, and that'll reach ahead. I think it will. I think there's already a group of people that's seeking a solution to that issue.
Yeah, I hear chatter out there, but I haven't seen any real action. So
If I can address it. So currently right now we have a citizen healthcare advisory group that's been meeting just, you know, to really get some of that in-depth feedback about what they perceive as those gaps and those issues are around healthcare in general to Sedona. You know, we know eventually it's going to need to be a larger regional solution because we are you know, in the Verde Valley, we're a bunch of rural communities, and we know that it's tough enough to look at competition. So we need to address it from a regional standpoint. But you know, one of the things that we've been talking about, and we've heard other city leaders around the Verde Valley talking about too, is trying to make sure that to get a better understanding of what the healthcare gaps are, and what our roles can be in filling those gaps. You know, we know that there's some healthcare that probably will never be available to our region. You know, we get the Red Rocks, so we may not always get the certain types that, you know, we may not get the Mayo Clinic, but we, you know, it's a targeted industry, and it's not just on not just the front of mind for our city council and an effort that I'm working on in economic development, but it's an issue that we're working on in our regional group too, is trying to look at those relationships, making sure that our residents have better access, and see what efforts can be made for competition.
just one other point, if I may. After talking to some of the people in leadership positions, I really don't see that the different communities are on the same page regarding what needs to be done with Yavapai College and the Verde Valley Medical Center. So I think it needs to start on the local level. The local leaders need to get together and discuss that and talk about, you know, where they're on the same page, how they can move together in terms of addressing this issue and actually, you know, approaching these 2 entities. So I think the mayors and the city council and the county supervisors really need to sit down and talk about it.
I think part with that sort of a challenge, part of the problem we face is that we're sort of anchored in the past in terms of how healthcare should look or how a college should look. And so my concern is not only don't we have it, but it's also that there's such a disruption going on in virtually every sector of the economy, but especially healthcare and academia. There's such a disruption going on, really brought on by technology and the Internet of Things, and that we don't even know what it's going to look like in the future. But we do know that that disruption also brings about innovation. And if we're open to new solutions and looking at what the delivery model might look like in the future, then I think that's a very, very positive thing. And then what niche role can we play here in our Verde Valley area or Sedona in terms of being involved in both of those areas?
I can give you an example. For instance, the truss manufacturer, that's the 110,000 square foot building being built here and 180 jobs over there. There has been at least a half a dozen meetings between the owners of that company and Yavapai College about creating the skilled workforce they need necessary in there. And I think that you're going to see the delivery of that kind of education service more like a surgical strike force than your traditional education pathway. You will see them be able to come in and provide training specifically for a specific profession. And that's exactly what we're talking about doing, bringing in folks that understand instrumentation, bringing in folks that understand hydraulic systems, electronics and controls and stuff like that. That's what that truss plant is. They claim it'll be the most sophisticated, technologically advanced truss manufacturing facility on the planet when it's built. And that's going to take a workforce that's just not somebody out there with a hammer or driving a forklift.
Well, and I think that the role of community college has evolved precisely to what Steve's talking about. Very short-term paybacks, what's specifically needed, what skill sets, what professions are needed today, and how do we make that happen? And so I certainly see that continuing. I think we also have a new dean is being hired for Yavapai College in the Verde Valley. Am I correct with that, Steve or Molly? Do you know?
She's been hired.
Great. So at least we have a person, a point of contact on this side of the mountain. So that should be helpful.
Great. And there's so many, it's hard to track everyone's thoughts in here. But one thing that struck me is Judith's comment, especially having lived here for 20 years, Judith. She remarks that healthcare, education, and housing are obvious challenges. These were challenges then 20 years ago and worse now. Less talk and more action would help. I guess I'm just wondering, Molly, Steve, Tom, what are the impediments, if you will, to implementation? I know that's a huge can of worms, but it's also the reality. And so, her comment about this being an issue for 20 years, we know issues change and morph over time, but if you could characterize that in some way, I think it might be helpful for all of us to understand the complexity of it. And what are ways to get around that?
I think, with housing, it's NIMBYs, the not in my backyard mentality. And I like to have my cake and eat it too, but it's one of the, it's kind of goes back to that trade-off of what are we willing to give up for that longer term sustainable economy down the road? I think that's been an impediment when it comes to like healthcare. Sometimes it is making sure we have the right doctors, whether it's affordability or perhaps, it's the stage that they are in life, when they're relocating. Some of the doctors have not wanted to relocate to Sedona because they have children who are in the primary education years, and doctors value education. It wasn't Sedona, it was the state of Arizona and the education system that they didn't like. And those, that's not in the city of Sedona's control. But those are some of those issues that are a little harder, and some of those barriers.
Yeah, I mean, what's the old saying? We've met the enemy and it's us. And so, and not only with NIMBY, but I would also take it in the housing arena. One of the battles I've been fighting for a couple of decades is what defines. We have this image of what a quality affordable house is, and we're seeing movement away from that with tiny homes, but we also, nobody wants to talk density. So if you have limited land and there's only one way to do if you want housing and for workforce housing, and it's to go up. And so, but we're not interested in talking about that either. And so, I think that we have we've self-imposed constraints, starting with NIMBYism, but also in terms of how we define what something should look like. What should healthcare look like? What should a house look like? And so I think we have to deal with those. The other thing, I think the low-hanging fruit, if we can continue to get movement at the state legislature on Airbnb and short-term rentals, is to get housing back into the housing market. And part of that, and what I mean by that is it's migrated over to the commercial market by virtue of being for tourism use. And part of that, those homes were owned by many homes were owned by second homeowners to begin with. And so they were already taken out of the market, but now second homeowners have the opportunity to make some money off of their home and to generate income for their situation. And so they're doing that as well. And that, so but if you can say, and with, in a sense, Airbnb is better than a second homeowner, because the city of Sedona now is getting a churn, if you will. That house is being used full time and generating sales tax full time, and the residents of Sedona are clearly benefiting in terms of the revenues for the city in recent years. But is that what you want? Right? Would you rather have it be, especially with the coming turnover in boomer housing in the next 2 decades, would you rather have housing be housing for workers in a community or in the region?
Yeah, I think what you're talking about is expectations. In many ways, we still have 20th century expectations in a 21st century world, and it's going to take a while for us to kind of change that mindset. I know that, and I'm just going to speak for Camp Verde. We have recently approved a couple of projects down there, and in both instances, in one instance, we raised the height limit, and in the other one, we raised the density of the housing. We realize that we only have even though Camp Verde is 42 square miles, much of it is U.S. Forest Service land, much of it is state land. And then if you actually dissect how much property you got left, we'll probably have about 2,500 acres of absolute developable land still in the town right now. And that's not a whole lot going forward. So I think we've started to take a little different view. We've started to take a different view of housing altogether. We have a tiny house project there with 24 units. We have a manufactured housing development down there where you're on a land lease. You own the house, but you don't own the land. The council's been willing to take a look at some kind of out of the box ideas. We now permit ADUs on any property. But you just have to be innovative. The world's different. It's not the way it was. The 2,000 square foot stick built house is not the house of the future. It's the house of the past.
Yeah, and if we look back at the, oh, are we both in audio? If we look back at the word cloud, which Carrie and I just did again, the word affordable housing is far exceeds any other word in there. And so I guess, you know, philosophically, when I think about this too, it's we're all agreeing, you know, and affordable housing is one of them. We know tourism is going to play a big role in discussions within the community plan, but there's a level of risk, and whatever that means, right? Risk is sort of philosophical. It means bending your mind on what you thought would be the best. It means taking a risk to solve a problem. And so, you know, I always encourage myself personally, what is risk averse about trying something new? And even if you don't get it right, you've begun to solve a little bit of the problem. And so, you know, I would encourage all of us to be thinking about that. Like, what are the steps we can take to change some of the situation with things like affordable housing? And these conversations, while hard, are a great place to start in that. So
Yeah. I'm watching the chat box, and I think the folks have been posting just recently are right on target. I mean, the quickest way from an economic point of view, okay, the quickest way to make the biggest dent in affordable housing is to allow long-term rentals in people's existing houses or ADUs, to put an ADU on my lot. Now that increases our density, but my neighbor next door is offended, you know, so there are all kinds of, and there's not enough parking. But if the goal is to create affordable housing quickly, that's a way to do it, you know. So and as Molly was talking earlier, economics is about trade-offs.
In
And so
2000s,
you got to
oh,
make
I'm
it
sorry.
work. You got to acknowledge the trade-off, decide what you're willing to do.
I can tell you in Camp Verde in 2007 or 2008, about the time that the economy started to crunch, the idea of the ADU was brought up, and it went down with only one council member voting for it. When it came up again here 3 years ago, it was unanimously voted through.
Mhm. Yeah.
In spite of a lot of pushback from some folks that they didn't want that in their neighbor's house. We heard it, but we also understood that we had an issue out there.
For the record, Keegan just posted a good question. ADU is an acronym standing for accessory dwelling unit. That is a planning term, but it is an ancillary housing unit on your property that we're talking about.
Great. Well,
If I might make a comment
Oh,
about
yes,
that.
please.
May I just please say something?
Yes.
Because my husband and I participated in the ADU program many years ago, in which the city of Sedona created, and it was quite unsuccessful. I think we were number 7 of 10 people who participated. We paid $2,250 to get a certificate, have an inspection of the ADU of the city, which it passed. And then they did away with it after I don't know how many years, because they just couldn't get participation because it's too costly and you can't make enough money to recover the costs you need to renovate an area for an ADU. And when they eliminated the program, we got a letter a few years ago that said, we no longer have this program, so you're not a participant. And we said, well, how about our $2,250 back then that we paid to get a certificate, of which we already knew the answer. And of course they said, oh no, we can't give you your money back. So I'm sorry if I'm a little skeptical about that particular project, but I can tell you that when we participated, we were pretty new to the area. We thought we would just do it just to have it as something and, to help out. And it was very unsuccessful. So maybe something will make it successful this time. I don't know what would, but it was not successful at all. And anybody who was there, most of those people are gone now from the city.
Thank you, Judith. Molly, and then we're going to transition out. Go ahead.
Okay, great. Yeah, I just wanted to make a comment. I mean, I think it's, we haven't said it, but and I think it's probably fairly obvious, but I think there's two ways to have affordable housing. And, you know, one way is like what we're talking about is, you know, when we're looking at density and ADU and all these cool housing solutions. But the other way, harder, and it's kind of what we've been talking about, but is making sure that people have the right wages and they're making livable wages so that they can afford it. Now, I know that even at some of these livable wages, housing in Sedona is unaffordable, but it does get us closer. And so, you know, that's why, you know, when we talk about diversification and we talk about these other industries, that's why that continues to be an important part is, you know, that's a year-round revenue stream for personal income that can help people continue to afford their homes and stay in Sedona year-round.
Can I make a comment? I moved to Sedona 20 years ago, and I was, you know, not a wealthy person, and I was able to purchase a home, and people I knew, like other teachers or, you know, just people who were like servers, you know, it was possible for people to buy homes, like, and people, you know, there was a lot of different kinds of people living here, and there were, you know, in it. And I remember before I had purchased my home, before I moved here, and I was like in 2002, hard pressed to find a renter for my home, and it was like vacant most of the time. And then when I did find one, they had so many choices that they set the rent. They told me what they could pay. And it was a completely different rental market. And I feel like, you know, you were talking before about homes being like baby boomers retiring and moving on, and homes being becoming vacant. Who's going to buy those homes? I don't think that there is any way that somebody who works in the market, in the Sedona like tourism market, can purchase a home or ever hope to purchase a home. The people who purchase homes here, I think, are people that are bringing their wealth from other places, whether they're retired or they have family money. And I don't see that changing. And I think that that's a problem in a lot of small towns. I don't think it's unique to Sedona, but it seems like the only things that get, the only economic development that is ever talked about is tourism. And we have our eggs in that basket. And, you know, I don't know what's going on with, you know, economic development, that I haven't heard of a single thing that comes to Sedona that's creating better jobs. And I think that that's where it's going to start, because the housing problem has been a housing problem for a very long time before short-term rentals. And there are not a lot of apartments here. People are against apartments. And I don't think that like rent, you know, the reason why the short-term rentals are in people's homes are because like the people who actually live here who have short-term rentals are doing it for passive streams of income, and investors are doing it because those are the people who can afford to buy houses here, are investors, or, you know, like the extremely wealthy. I was, you know, going for a walk last year and met some nice people that were, you know, staying in a vacation rental, and they seemed like they were, you know, from Pennsylvania, and they were talking about retiring, and they said, we thought we could retire here. And they were, you know, professionals with money, and they're like, you know, now that we look at it, we can't, you know, afford to, you know, it doesn't make sense to retire here. So I think that the direction that Sedona is moving is just becoming like more and more a tourist place and a place for the wealthy. And I don't know if there's anything that can seriously be done to change that.
Thank you, Julia. I think your sharing and all of your sharing tonight really demonstrate the complexity of the issues that Sedona is facing. And to me, you know, there's not a recipe for success, you know, and that's why there are experts like Tom and Molly and Steve who can help us think through the sequencing, right? Do you bring more jobs? What do you fix? What do you try to fix first? And I wish we had several more hours to talk about that. We don't, but I can tell you that there are big in-person conversations that are about to happen in the spring. So these are to be announced, but probably February, March. Some of those will include balancing community growth, tourism. I love the conversation about what growth means to people tonight. I think it's really interesting to reframe and to really challenge ourselves on what growth means and how we redefine it, how we use it, what it means and what it doesn't mean, and really come together on the term as a community. Housing, huge one to tackle, and how that relates to land use and densities and being uncomfortable. There are going to have to be some changes in mindsets. If you can recognize that affordable housing is an issue, but you also hate density, I think there's some personal responsibility from each and every one of us to say, how will we rectify that discrepancy? So there are so many conversations to be held. We promise to listen. Our group will be helping facilitate these. They will be in person. There will be outcome recommendations as well. Perhaps it is time to revisit some of these committees that came together and it was too challenging at that time for whatever reason to reinvigorate those. So stay tuned. Enjoy your holidays and check plansedona.com for upcoming. Again, we have at least 2 workshops, and we will be sending out a quick check-in with you all who were able to join us tonight about whether you were happy with how this went, what additional questions you have. Please be honest, just like you were tonight in this conversation. Thank you so much for the respectful dialogue in the chat box. Please let us and the city know how to do a better job of taking these conversations forwards. The frustration is palpable, but also the community love for the place and the desire to be closer as a community is also really palpable. So thank you so much for your time. And Cynthia, you have a big job ahead of you as the lead planner, and your job right now is to take us out for the evening.
Oh, the pressure.
Just say thanks. Look at all these people. They've devoted an hour and a half of their time to us.
Yeah, no, thank you all for participating. And if, as Andy said, if you have more to add to the discussion, you can go to plansedona.com and there are comment forms that you can fill out. We also have contact information if you want to email any of us, feel free to do so.
Yeah. And I think the thing that you can also do is, I mean, we had a wonderful showing at our first community forum, something like 300 people. We are not afraid of big conversations. So please tell your neighbor about how to get engaged in this, and let's get together and keep talking about these issues. So thanks again so much for your time tonight, and we'll see you soon, and happy holidays to everyone.
Thank you all.
Stop recording. Stop recording. Why? Cynthia
on.
hasn't gotten the message
Hold
that
on.
we hang out.
I don't know how to stop recording. Hold on.
Should be on your bottom.